Welcome on back to On Texas Football. I'm CJ Vogel, joined by Jeff Howe and Rod Babers. We're talking more ball with you guys today, this time short distances. And I went down a rabbit hole this weekend. I brought back some goodies. And normally when I go down these rabbit holes, I hang out with Bugs Bunny for a little bit, come back with some carrots. Don't have them down in the refrigerator today. But Jeff, Rod, today we're going to be focusing a lot on Texas offense in the short distances and what we saw on the field in 2025. Obviously, in the passing game, the run game, I think a lot of kind of the pent-up frustration was kind of the lack of success, especially running the football when you needed 1, 2, or 3 yards, and how this new Texas offensive line in 2026 will then kind of revamp that, or at least provide some more push on the interior. So I want to get y'all's thoughts on that. Of course, we'll talk how Texas fared in the pass game and the run game, who some of the biggest successes were in that regard as well. But I'll start here because I think this is really interesting. I went game by game, who Texas had the most success with in these short distances. Obviously, I think that dictates a lot of how the game itself played out. But real quick, here it is. Texas had, for example here, against Ohio State, Texas was 8 of 13 converting. That's scoring a touchdown or that's getting a first down on distances of 1, 2, or 3 against Ohio State. You have some of the numbers here. I think some of the uglier ones, obviously. Only 3 short distances against Florida, only 4 against Georgia. But, Jeff, I'll start with you because I know this is a lot to unpack. What was it about some of these numbers, some of what you remember from the season that really stood out to you about Texas in the short distances and ultimately trying to gain those ugly, dirty yards?
The more either in the moment or after the fact or this long after the fact that we go over numbers from the UTEP game, that was the one to me that when I'm like, okay, we've really got to rethink everything we thought about this offense at that point. And like it's almost a miracle that they were as productive as they were at the end of the year. A lot of that had to do with Arch's development, but like this offense was it was lost going into SEC play for the most part. I think it's to borrow a term from Rod, it's multifactorial as to why you were that bad. Your running back situation, CJ Baxter, I don't think was he didn't have the juice he had before the injury. Trey Wisner was banged up. You didn't really get what you thought you were going to get from Jarrett Gibson or what you'd hope to get from Jarrett Gibson. Your offensive line was a mess. So I think all of that comes together. And yeah, it was a mess even when you got a lot of attempts. And then in some of those games, you were just so far behind the chains. You didn't give yourself a chance to be in, favorable down and distances on second, third, or fourth down.
Yeah, I think that's where I was going to go with you, Rod, is you look at some of these numbers and, this doesn't give you a big picture ultimately of how games go, but you only have 3 short distances against Florida. Texas led behind the chains there. Obviously, against Oklahoma, you have 6 of those came in the second half, right? They were in third and forever for most of that first half. And obviously against Georgia, Kentucky, I think also was a pretty clean example of how those games went offensively. What has to change in 2026 to make sure that you're living ahead of some of these long distances?
Yeah, I think, ultimately for Texas, because this has kind of been an issue for a while with Sark, right? And I think they're kind of power situations is what I call them. They're different definitions, but you're dealing with a power situation when you're in short yardage, and teams would like to ultimately just run the ball, impose your will, and play bully ball. And Texas hasn't been able to do that. There were times, we've seen in recent years where Sark, in those very situations, he'd rather call, a reverse, have a trick play, snap between the legs, direct snap, something like that, rather than say, let's line up and let's just move these guys. Let's just move the pile. And Texas can't really do that. So that missing that power element. That's why they prioritize power back this year. All right, a power back in the transfer portal. They didn't get it because they need a power element. Sometimes that's a running back. Sometimes it's just Deontay Foreman saying, I don't necessarily need a great old line.
Yeah.
Just get in his way and get the hell out of my way. All right. I'm a power back. I'm gonna get yards because that's just the way that's the way their skill set translates, right? They in those power situations. And I don't think Texas has the back. They don't have the line for it necessarily either. Sark's scheme, I think, he's trying to be a more power-oriented scheme. They're running more inside power. They want to run more inside zone. So they want to be Sark this year. They were trending toward more inside power than outside zone. They want to be. So Sark is saying, and look at the backs that they've been bringing in, your Cedric Baxters and Jerry Gibson. Even those guys, when they're babies, they put them out there in situations like, nah, Jerry Gibson's our best. He's our best option in a power situation. Cedric Baxter, our best option in a power situation. They were babies at the time. And the injuries and then the distrust of Jerry Gibson, but the injuries to Cedric Baxter also set them back in that regard. So they can't seem to get a power element in the run game. Arch may be the best damn power element in the run game, which is crazy.
Yeah,
it is.
But you know what I mean? So they can't figure that out. They've had bad luck injury-wise and obviously acquisition-wise trying to add that. You know, Casey Studdard was a power element, just himself. He's like, nah, that's what I'm going to be the power element. I talked to Matt Trissel. He's a fullback, power element. No, I'm saying. I thought he's like, that's all we ran was power. That's all we ran was power with cap schemes. We ran the same 3 plays all the time with Sid Benson. Everybody knew Sid Benson, lean forward, power back. You know what I mean? It depends on how you build your roster and build your team. And Texas, unfortunately, has not had luck adding that element to Sark's offense, period.
Yeah, for whatever the reason, I think there's 2 really main factors there. It's, hey, does your offensive line have that will and that want to? Do they get flat backs off the snap and do they move people off the block, right? We've seen that, I would say, inconsistently over the last 3 years when Texas has really been contending at a national scale. But on top of that, do you get too running back dependent? And Rod, I know that we've talked about this a lot. You've been a big proponent of this when Sark first arrived at Texas. It was, hey, I don't know if we're necessarily out scheming guys or out blocking, but we have Roschon and Bijan. Now you're just going to figure it out.
Yep.
And that was a lot of what I looked at as well in this kind of conversation, is which of the running backs truly had success in these short distance situations. And you see the numbers here. Christian Clark, 6 of 8. Arch Manning, to the conversation we were just having, he just might be the overall, overwhelming factor when it comes to his power running or short distance running ability. But the 2 surprises to me, Jeff, and I'd like to get your thoughts on this, were the 2 guys that coming into the year were the expected short distance backs of CJ Baxter and Jarrett Gibson, combined 8 of 19, not necessarily getting the job done there.
I'll get to Arch in a second because there's some numbers to back up your numbers with, kind of to Rod, and it backs up Rod's point that Arch was probably the best short yardage option you had. We'll get to that in a minute. But with Baxter, I know the staff was optimistic, and there was a reason why all of us here on this channel kept saying, hey, it was a really serious knee injury. Maybe they just need to take it easy. Like, don't raise the expectations too high. And he just, at the end of the day, CJ, he just didn't have the juice that we saw pre-injury. And it's just that's his body letting him down. With Jarrett Gibson, I know everybody had fun with the baby rhino nickname as a true freshman, but it's like that was not like an overwhelming compliment. I think people kind of missed the point of that. Like, no, like you're just putting your head down and just burying your head and trying to get what you can. Now, like, look up. Like, you got to look where things are going. Like, you got to see the whole. You got to watch it develop. And Jarrett Gibson just never really got that part of it. Maybe it works out for him at his next stop. It just didn't work out for him from that standpoint at Texas. But, you look at Arch right there and 13 of 19 on short distance. I went just for funsies. I went and looked at the red zone numbers this year. And Texas, actually, if you look at it year over year, their conversion percentage in general was up in the red zone. I mean, they were 77% scoring rate in 24. They're a little over 85 this year. And the touchdown rate by percentages was up. Okay, so what was the difference? Like, why were you, in theory, more effective? Well, this year you scored 30 touchdowns in the red zone. Arch Manning had a hand in 24 of those. 16 passes, 7 runs, and Arch did have a touchdown catch in the red zone too against Arkansas. So I think the more you look at it, I think this is one of those evolutions from Sark that I want to see, because he hasn't had a quarterback like Arch where he does fit everything you want as a passer in your offense. But it's not like when he had Jake Locker at UW where he had to completely change like what his offense was to fit the quarterback. Like, no, it can be kind of that West Coast passing game, the passing game you've always had, but you got to have the quarterback run game in it. Otherwise, you're hamstringing yourself. You're not taking advantage of everything Arch brings to the table. And, his forward body lean, his physicality. Yeah, he was really good in short yardage situations. And the other thing I'll add on too, guys, with Sark, The one thing I've really held against Sark in some of these short yardage situations, CJ, is from a play calling standpoint, sometimes his sequencing, especially in the goal to go situation.
I agree.
There's one play in there, like in the ones that stand out. It's the goal line stand that Oklahoma had in 2023, the Cotton Bowl against Ohio State, and the Ohio State game this past season. Mm-hmm. There's one of those plays in those 3 or 4 where you're like, dude, what was that? Like, that wasn't like there's trying to break tendency, and then there's just throwing something at the wall and hoping it sticks, right? And that's what some of that stuff was. So hopefully now that Sark has a better feel for how to call a game that maximizes everything Arch brings to the table, maybe we'll see Texas hit a higher percentage of these this coming season.
And I wanted to ask you, Rod, a little bit about 26, because to Jeff's point about Arch's continued growth, the legs, you now bring in Raleek Brown, Hollywood Smothers, right? Derek Cooper will be in the mix. I'm not asking you to pull out a crystal ball and look into the future, but Texas should be more well-equipped when it comes to converting some of these short distance situations and goal line situations in 2026.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, especially from a rushing perspective, Arch is going to be savvier. I agree with Jeff's point about now Sark may have a better idea of how to maximize him. And I think now that you have these 2 backs, Raleek Brown and Hollywood Smothers in the backfield too, I think you got to make sure that you're emphasizing, and Sark does it anyway, but even more so, more misdirection in these situations as well. Because oftentimes, all you need is a one false step by a defender in these situations. Everything pops and happens so quickly. So with those and having so many weapons, they'll have to worry about. I mean, you're in short yardage, they're going to have to worry about, depending on if you spread them out, their wide receivers, you'll have to worry about Texas and, the traditional running game. But the QB run game for Texas, I think, has been the great equalizer in these situations. And you don't want to abuse it because you don't want to have something happen to Arch. But I mean, remember Arch's 2 years ago when Quinn was starting quarterback, Arch literally would come in as like a Tebow package.
Right.
No, he really would. He really come in and literally just ram over people. Like he was Bam Bam Sam or something. He was like, man, this is wild to have this Manning doing this. So it's kind of in his nature. And I think ultimately Sark needs to utilize that in those big games, especially playing against, big time opponents, and like obviously Ohio State being another example of it. You got to make sure you maximize that advantage, because that's the big advantage you have now in a power situation is the +1 in the run game.
Yeah, you absolutely do. And kind of the one thing you have to be wary about is how many hits Arch is taking, right?
Exactly.
He took a big hit against Ohio State in 2025, the Cotton Bowl, and obviously he took a big hit that took him out of the game against Mississippi State in overtime. So utilizing him, I think we're all looking at as a significant plus to the offense, but got to be smart. And then I think that's where the growth comes eventually in 2026 as well. Flipping over to the passing game, because I thought this was also really interesting. Texas on distances to go of 1 to 3 yards, passing the football, they were 16 of 35.
Wow.
Not great, right? They were 9 of 18 on third downs. They were 0 for 3 on fourth downs on short distances. But a lot of the focus, and I think a lot of what we'll talk about now with the addition of Cam Coleman to the room, is who those targets were directed to. And this was probably one of the bigger surprises that I had in doing all of this research and going down this rabbit hole, where the targets went. And you see there, Parker Livingston, 11 targets, more than double that of anybody else in the receiving room for 2025. That, to me, was really surprising. And, yeah, you see it there. Texas, for the most part, had more success throwing to Parker than a few other options. But I don't know where Texas goes, Jeff, when it comes to throwing and needing to convert. Maybe a Cam Coleman in the red area is kind of that guy that you look at. But more than anything, the Xavier Worthy, the Matthew Golden, the Isaiah Bond, just one-on-one, I'm going to beat you with a whip, a slant, a curl, anything like that. Felt like it was absent in the short passing game last year.
I think there's a couple things at play to me here. And Rod, we talked a little bit about this actually on Football Theory this week. I think one is Arch early in the year, especially wasn't comfortable, the timing was off, whatever it was, at throwing to a target on the move. And in a lot of those short distances, it's going to be an RPO, some kind of glance or a slant or something like that, where you're throwing to a guy on the move, or maybe you got to throw him open. Arch still isn't elite at that, but he at least got to a point late in the year where I think he was competent at that. So I think Arch growing from that standpoint is good. Arch is better throwing to a stationary target.
Yeah,
that's just the sampling of throws and his better throws that he can complete on the route tree. I think it's when guys are either stationary or they're not on the move like it is with some of the RPO stuff. He's getting better at it. Probably not where he needs to be or where he wants to be, but he is getting better at it. But it was a struggle early on. The other thing too, and I think this bleeds into a couple other things. This is, to me, why guard was so important to attack in the portal. I know the run game was big. But Texas, in short yardage, whether they're running or throwing the ball, they pull their guards a lot.
they do.
A lot of it is slower developing plays.
Mhm.
So I think the big thing this spring is and this is whether Lawrence Seymour's eligible or not, you really need to take stock of your personnel at guard and decide, okay, do we need to change some things from a run blocking scheme standpoint and from a protection standpoint to basically eliminate that margin for error and don't ask the guards to do so much.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really big part of the short yard stuff, because Rod, we've seen it like sometimes in short yards, even when Texas was better at it at times, like in 23, I didn't like the fact that, man, sometimes you pull your guards in short yards, like it's a skip pull, it's a longer developing play.
Yeah.
I mean, when you face really athletic defensive fronts, they can shut that down really quick. So I think schematically, from a blocking and a protection standpoint, guys, I think Sark has to really reevaluate some of the things they're doing in short yardage.
Yeah. Passing game specifically, I know 16-35, not necessarily the most encouraging number there. But as we saw in the red zone this year, and you brought up the numbers, Jeff, Sark improves. Rod, when it comes to short distant passing or anything in this area of the game, what is it that you hope to see more of in 2026?
Oh, that's good. I think ultimately,
outside of success,
we're talking about just the passing or the rushing too.
Talk about everything.
Well, I think, I would love Texas to find an identity in these situations. Something they do really well in these situations, whether it's a play or a concept or it's a player. Like I said, maybe it is Arch. I hope it's not just Arch, because as you pointed out, CJ, I think you're right. And you got to watch the amount of, punishment that Arch is taking on a week-to-week basis. Maybe it's a guy like a Nick Townsend they're moving around, right? And putting him in a power situation as a fullback. We've seen them do stuff like that. Maybe that's it. Maybe it's the addition of, the new tight end that they have, Masunas. They're really excited about him as a blocker. They do need to get an identity in the power situations like this, because they haven't had one since Bijan and Rojo. Bijan and Rojo, there was their identity in the power situations. Honestly, Rojo was a big part of it, or the Roge Cat. Maybe it's that. Maybe they had the Wildcat for a while. They would break out with Savion Red, and it was in these power situations. Like, they need to get something they do well in this way. Now, you don't want to take Arch Manning off the field. I get that, but my point is they need to get a money concept, or they need to get an identity they forge in these situations, so they can. Because, like you said, Jeff, that's why the sequencing seems off. Because it seems like they're just kind of throwing stuff because they don't really have anything they can rely on, that they can hang their hat on. And I think that's a big part of it. So hopefully this spring, that's something that they're working on and trying to forge. But I think right now it's going to end up being Arch. He seems to be the answer to all those things. So I think it's going to end up being utilizing Arch a little bit more and effectively in those situations.
I think we can all agree, as long as we don't see toss into the boundary in any of these situations, we'll all be better off for it.
No, Jeff, to bring up bad memories, I'll bring up one more just because you started it. To your point, Rod, when you can rely on something and then build off of it and kind of tinker to the way that it's defended, life becomes significantly more difficult. I look back to that 42-41 West Virginia 2-point conversion win at DKR back in the Big 12 days. You go back and you look at that West Virginia offense. What they did with Will Grier in short situations was very intriguing to me, right? Yeah. It was almost the same formation every time, but it was little tinkerings, right? It was kind of that 4x1 diamond formation to the right. You could have the one-on-one matchup if you like it. If the numbers are favorable to you, hey, you have a quick screen and go. Or if the box is empty, you can run power, you can run counter, you can do whatever you want with a quarterback that's mobile and get it done. But if you're an opposing defense, how do you go about defending all of that, right?
Yeah.
One of those is going to always be open. I'm not saying to do this in every short distance situations, but that was the identity of that West Virginia team. And life became very difficult for opponents to stop that consistently because different looks provided different opportunities to attack. So
great example.
I don't know what 2026 will bring, but I do look at Raleek Brown. I do look at Hollywood Smothers, and I say, these guys can break tackles. There's quick burst in the hole. Of course, Cam Coleman is a guy that you could just lob a pass up to and take your 50-50 chances there as well. So the options should be bountiful for Texas altogether. Hopefully 15 of 36 passing and some of the numbers that we saw in the run game as well tidy up. But that will do for today, a little weekend edition of On Texas Football. Of course, we'll have more coming to you this weekend, some official visitors on campus. We'll break all of that down over on ontexasfootball.com. But for Rod Babers and Jeff Howe, for our lovely producer, Mr. Matthew, behind the scenes as well, I'm CJ Vogel. Y'all have a good weekend and hope.